We begin today the Gemara towards the bottom of Nun Ches Amud Beis, 7 lines up from the bottom of the Yamud, where it says Otu. So the Gemara here is discussing a behemoth that damages a field, a produce in a field. So we had before in the Gemara, you don't evaluate the payment of just this produce that it damaged. Rather, you evaluate it in relation to a bigger area, a bigger property. And basically it said various opinions how you go about this, but the point is that you evaluate it in relation to something that's 60 times as much. So the Gemara here brought a story of a person that cut down someone's palm tree himself, not his animal. He cut down the palm tree, and he came to Reish Galusa, and they made him pay the full price of the palm tree. Then Rav Nachman said, no, you don't pay the full price. You look as if there was 60 palm trees here, and he cut down 1 out of 60. What's the loss in 1 out of 60? That's how you evaluate it, which comes out to be less than if you evaluate one palm tree for itself.
Even though there's only one tree there.
Yeah, correct. In that case, it happens to be there were 3, but you always evaluate it 1 in 60. Okay, so now the Gemara Rav over here brings up the discussion. Yeah, Taka did say before that you don't evaluate the produce for itself. You evaluate it in relation to 60 times as much in the property. But he says maybe we should make a distinction between niske behema and niske gufay. If it's the behema that was mazik, there that pasuk says that it has to be in the soda, agav soda. But maybe when a person himself goes and cuts down someone's tree, niske gufay, maybe in such a case he does have to pay the full value of this tree itself without seeing it in relation to anything more. That's a discussion. The Gemara brought a braisa here, where in the lashon of the braisa, when it talks about a person that destroyed his friend's vineyard, it doesn't mention anything about in relation to anything that's 60 times the amount. So the Gemara here comes and says, just because it didn't mention that in the braisa beferish, it's not a raya. Because the Gemara says here, I'll bring you another braisa where it talks about an animal that damages, and it still doesn't say beferish that you have to evaluate what it damaged in relation to a bigger field, but we know that that's the halacha. So the fact that it doesn't say this beferish when a person destroys someone's vineyard, it doesn't mean that you don't evaluate it in relation to a bigger area. So let's see, the Gemara here brings a braisa, and this braisa actually there's a lot of different details which the Gemara will explain. So the Gemara, Otu gabe behemte nami. By a behemoth that damages the produce of someone's property. Milay Tanya, did we not learn in a braisa kai gavna a similar thing where the braisa talks about evaluating the damage, and it doesn't mention anything about evaluating it in relation to 60 times the amount in a big property? So what does it say in the braisa? Tanya, the braisa says, Kotma netia. If a person caught a little sapling, how much do you pay for this? So Rabbi Yossi said about this that Goizrei Gzeiris for Yerushalayim. There were those that established decrees in Yerushalayim. As she says, there's a whole list of different decrees that the Gemara mentions in the end of Bava Basra that were made by Admain and Chanan ben Avshalom. They made different penalties. So here as well, they made a knas. So they said, Nitiya Bashnasa, if this is a sapling that was 2 years old, Shtei Kesef. So you have to pay 2 kesef for this. Vashtei Shonim, if it was 2 years old, Arba Kesef. You pay 4 Kesef. So this is a knas. Even if the sapling was worth less than that, this was the knas that they established that you have to pay. Ochla chaziz. If a person ate chaziz. Chaziz is when you have the grain, when it begins to sprout, and instead of it growing to its full ripeness, so you went and you ate it, you trimmed it and you used it then when it's still just beginning to sprout. It's called usually in the Gemara shachas. So Rabbi Yosef Lili says, how do you evaluate this damage? You evaluate the damage by looking at the rest of the grain in the field that's left over, meaning you have to see the rest of the grain in the field when it will ripen. What will its value be then? So now this chaziz that you ate it when it was very small and it was just beginning to sprout, so you're not going to just pay the value of what you ate, which is very small. You pay what it could have turned into. What it could have grown to be a full ripe wheat or barley, whatever it is. That's how you evaluate it. Chachamim say no. You look at the way it is now. You look at the property itself, and if you're selling the property, how much is it worth when I had that shachas there? What would the sale, the value be? And if you're selling it now that you ate up this area here, how much loss is there in the value of the property when you sell it? You don't look at what it could have turned into later. This is regarding grain. Similar machlekes regarding when it comes to a vineyard. Ochla smader. You ate from someone's vine. And this is actually talking about an animal. All of this is talking about the damage of an animal. An animal came and ate smader. Smader are the grapes right when they begin to bud. Very, very small grapes. So that's what you ate. So how do you evaluate this damage? Rabbi Shua here says, you look at it, what would be its value when it would be grapes that are already fully ripe and ready to be cut. So even though it only ate it as smader, very small budding grapes, but it could have turned into these fully ripe grapes. That's what you pay for it. Chachamim say, no. You evaluate the property as is, what's its value right now to sell. So therefore, if you selling it now, what would be its value with the smader there? And now that the smader is not there, how much its value went down? Rav Shimon ben Yehuda says, Mishum Rav Shimon in the name of Rav Shimon. And here Rav Shimon brings up a third possibility regarding how we look at the stage of the grapes growing. And that is as follows. When is what the Chachamim said true, that you just evaluate the property for how much it could be sold now, after it got this damage, how much its value went down. If the grapes, this vine over here, had no grapes in it at all, not ripe grapes, and not even the smader, which are the budding grapes. It just had maybe some shoots of clusters that it's gonna grow grapes in it, but it's just shoots. And the same thing with Yechurei Teinim, these shoots where you see where the figs are gonna grow in it. But there was no beginning of a fruit there at all. So in such a case, I say, there's no actual fruits here in any way, shape, or form, so you just evaluate the property of what the loss of its value is if you would sell it now after you ate up from this area. But if you're eating from the property, from these grapes, the animal ate, pagim or boiser, pagim are, both pagim and boiser are half-ripe figs or half-ripe grapes. So this is not just smader. Smader is when it begins to bud. Pag is ready, pagim and boiser is when it's half-ripe. So then when it's half-ripe, then he agrees to what Rabbi Shua said before, we see it as if it's already fully ripe grapes, ready to cut, and therefore you evaluate its damage for what it is separately, these grapes that are ready to be cut. Okay, that's Atkan the Braisa. Discussing various stages of the ripeness of grain or of a vineyard or of a fig tree. Now, says the Gemara, Ketani miyas. What do we see here? What does it say in this Braisa? The Chachamim say, how do you evaluate the damage? You look at this area where the animal ate from, and you evaluate how much was it worth if you're selling it before it ate up the produce here, and how much is it worth now. The Braisa doesn't spell out that what this means is that you don't just evaluate this area itself, but you evaluate it in relation to a larger part, which is 60 times the amount. It doesn't spell that out here in the Braisa. But that must be what the Chachamim meant, because that's what we learned in our Mishnah, and the Chachamim definitely agreed to this. So, what are you going to say? That even though the Chachamim did not spell that out, it's because they're not focusing on this detail. They're focusing on the other detail. They're arguing with Rabbi Shua or the other opinions over here regarding the ripeness and so on. So what are you going to say? B'shishim. But really, of course, the Chachamim meant that when you evaluate the loss of value of the property, it means in relation to a larger area. That's over here in this Braisa, when it talks about an animal that ate. So if so, what the Gemara now says is, Hachenami, so to a previous Braisa that we learned that was brought in the end of Chesamid Beis, that speaks about when a person destroyed a vineyard, and it says you have to pay for the loss, and it doesn't mention anything about evaluating it in relation to Shishim, so Hachenami b'Shishim, doesn't matter. There's no raya from there that when a person is mazik with his own body, that you don't evaluate b'Shishim. Maybe there it also means only b'Shishim in relation to a larger area.
Even if there's no Shishim in that field?
Correct, yes. Still, that's the way you evaluate it. You have to look in another property and see how you evaluate it that way.
But
correct?
The field was never sold that way to begin with. I mean,
but the point is, if you're going to just evaluate this area itself, so it's a small place, you're going to end up paying very expensive.
How much the whole field? It's a small field. How much that small field will be with the tree and without the tree?
But it's not enough that field. The Gemara explained before there are different. In the end of Daf Nuches, the Gemara explains there are still different sizes. There's kav, there's core. if you're gonna, Chazal said Dafke Shishim, and before we had different shiurim, whether it means Shishim Saw or Shishim Tarkiv. Chazal wa Mishayir, which is the right shir to be Mishayir, to get the right value to pay for the loss that happened there, not too high and not too low. Even though in this field there is no Shishim. Yeah, that's the halacha. Okay, look up the Gemara and then the Ches Amud Beis explained it more. Okay, now the Gemara says like this. Amar Abaye. Abaye says, Rabbi Yisek Lili and Rabbi Shmuel, Amr Dover Echad. Both Rabbi Yisek Lili and Rabbi Shmuel are saying the same point. What same point is the Gemara referring to? Rabbi Yisek Lili, Hada Maran. Rabbi Yisek Lili, the point that we said before, the Chiddush of Rabbi Yisek Lili, in the beginning of the Braisa was, Nidim b'Mishri Yishabai. If someone comes and eats the wheat from when it began sprouting, he doesn't just pay for the value of that wheat in its condition when he ate it. You have to evaluate it, what it could have turned into. When you see the rest of the field, what it grew into. You look in the future. That's Rabbi Yisek Lili. And Rabbi Shmuel is the same thing. Where do we see this? Rabbi Shmuel, Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, and this was brought earlier in the Masechta, when the Pasuk says, Meitav Sadeh, Meitav Karmi Yishalem, that you pay the best of your field or the best of your vineyard. What does this mean? Meitav Sadeh Shal Nizik, Meitav Karmi Shal Nizik. You pay the best of the field of the one that you damaged, whether it's his vineyard or whether it's his field. David Rabbi Shmuel, that's what Rabbi Shmuel says. Okay, now Rabbi Kiva argues and says, no, loiba kasav ela ligbois lenizakin min idis. All the Torah is coming to say is that you collect from the idis, from the best of the idis, of the properties of the mazik. Then he adds, definitely by hektish as well, you pay this payment of idis. Okay, so now, if you remember, we had a discussion, this is earlier on in the Masechta, the Gemara discussed there, what exactly is the machlokes of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva? It's not clear over here what their argument is. If you look in the words of Rabbi Shmuel literally, it sounds like Rabbi Shmuel is saying, even if your animal damaged an inferior quality of someone's property, you pay idishal nizik. You pay as if your animal damaged a very good quality property. That doesn't make sense. Why should you pay for the best quality if it only damaged a very, very low quality? And now there's a pshat that the Gemara brought earlier in the Masechta, and here the Gemara quotes this pshat, and it says that this also cannot be the pshat. And what was that pshat that the Gemara quoted earlier? Now, v'loi teime, don't tell me that what Rabbi Shmuel, when he said the best of the field of the nizik, what he meant to say is as follows. Ravidi bar Oven, like Ravidi bar Oven tried to explain this. Omar Ravidi bar Oven, Ravidi bar Oven said, Kagoin sha'achla aruga bein arugais. That the case that Rabbi Shmuel was talking about is that when your animal came and ate an area amongst other areas in this person's field, and v'loyadinon, and we don't know whether that area where your animal ate, was it from a low quality or from a very good quality. So it's a suffix, what you damaged, what your animal damaged. So maybe Ravidi bar Oven said this is what Rabbi Shmuel meant. The Omar or the Amrina, we say to the mazik, kum shlim shmeina b'meitav. You have to pay for the ate, as if we know that it ate from the best of the quality of the field, and pay from your meitav. B'meitav the ikka, that is, with the meitav that you have. 1 second, read this all together. Yeah, b'meitav the ikka hashta, with the meitav that you have now. So this is the pshat that Rav Ida bar Oven wanted to say. That in a case where it's unclear what he was mazik, we learn from the pasuk meitav sadehu of the nizik that you pay the best of his fields. That as if we know that you will mazik the best of its fields. So on that, the Gemara says this pshat of Rav Ida bar Oven also can't be true. And the Gemara already before asks this, because the hachiloi mrina, we wouldn't paskin this way. Why not? My time, because we have a rule always. Hamoitzi mechaverai olavaraya. Hamoitzi mechaverai, a person that if there's a suffix what you damaged, and this nizik wants to charge you for eating the best quality of his fields, let him bring the proof that you actually ate the best quality of his fields. So that can't be the pshat on what Rabbi Shmuel is saying. So hello, says the Gemara, you know what Rabbi Shmuel meant to say? The same point as Rabbi Yisrael Glili. B'meitav d'lekamei. That he's saying, meitav sadeu shel nizik, even though when you ate it now, you ate it and it was still an inferior quality, it didn't grow yet much, but it's gonna grow later, so you're gonna have to pay for that. So what is this that we say over here? That you have to pay. Lekamei, how did they touch over there? In the
corresponds to this when it is removed, when the spit is removed.
Time of cutting.
Yeah, exactly. And the time when you cut it. You don't look at the time when it damaged earlier on, but you look at the time when it actually gets cut later. And therefore, you based on the future, is going to have to pay much more. Exactly like Rabbi Yossi Aglili said. Okay. Just before we go to the next piece of the Gemara, Tosfos here actually brings that it's very interesting that the Gemara is skipping the actual final pshat. The Gemara discussed this all in the first Perek, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva, and the Gemara here is skipping the actual final pshat that the Gemara said there. There the Gemara said that the argument between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva is when you evaluate and you have to pay from Idis, the best of your properties, how do you define Idis? Is it based on the value of the fields of the Mazik or the fields of the Nizik? What Rabbi Shmuel was saying is you have to look at the fields of the Nizik. Rabbi Kiva says, no, you look at the fields of the Mazik, and he gives what's his best on his level. The whole concept of Idis is all relative. That's how the Gemara explains the Machlokes in the first Perek. So Tosfos here says the Gemara is not having charata from that pshat. That pshat that said in the first Perek remains. But here the Gemara is adding an additional pshat, because the lashon of the Braisa is mashma that Rabbi Shmuel is coming to be machmer more than Rabbi Kiva. Because Rabbi Kiva says, Leibar kosav elo, sounds like Rabbi Kiva is coming to be lenient. So from that lashon, the Gemara adds a second pshat that Rabbi Shmuel is saying that you pay based on what it could have developed into in the future, and Rabbi Kiva is makel and says no. So it's an additional pshat. We're not having charata from the previous pshat. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to the Braisa. Omar, and the Braisa said, Rab Shimon ben Yehuda oime mishum Rab Shimon. So he said regarding eating the animal that ate from the grapes. So he says as follows: when do you say that you evaluate the property itself, what it could have been sold for before it ate from it, and what it's sold for now? That's if there's no actual fruits here yet. If there were just shoots where the grapes grow from or where the figs grow from it. Okay. That's the first point that Rab Shimon ben Yehuda said. There's no fruits there. So if you just evaluate the value of the property. Now, what do we understand from this? Ha smader. But according to Rab Shimon ben Yehuda, if there was already budding grapes, so then then he would agree to what Rabbi Yeshua said before, that you have to see it as if it's already ready and ripe grapes, and you pay for the value of those grapes for itself. But Amos Seif, what does Rab Shimon ben Yehuda say right after this? That when do you say that you pay for these grapes for themselves? If you ate, whether from the fig tree you ate already, it's half ripe figs or half ripe grapes. So then he says, then we say that it's as if it's already fully ripe grapes and you pay for it separately. But from this I understand if it's just budding grapes or budding figs, then you don't just pay for the grapes or figs separately, you pay for the value of the property, how much it would be sold in that condition. So we have a contradiction. Rab Shimon ben Yehuda is jumping from the case of where it's just shoots in the property to a case where you have half ripe fruits already. What's with that case in the middle? Smader. It's not clear what he holds about this. So the Gemara answers, we're going to have to add in over here this smader. Kroich v'tani, add it in, put it in, and learn it in the words of Rav Shimon ben Yehuda, and you'll read what he said as follows. When do you say that you pay just for the value of the property as far as what it could be sold for? If it ate from the vine or from the fig tree when there was no fruits there at all. And here you add in smader. If it ate, whether it's budding fruits, whether it's half-ripe fruits, then because there's already fruits here, then you look at this tree as if it's ready, ripe figs, ready to be cut, and that's what you evaluate. That's how you read it here in the Braisa. Okay, so there's no contradiction here. But the Gemara now asks, if that's what Rab Shimon ben Yehuda is saying, Rab Shimon ben Yehuda, Hainu Rabbi Yeshua. So he's saying the exact same thing that Rabbi Yeshua said earlier in the Braisa. Rabbi Yeshua also gave this shear, that as long as you have already budding fruits here, or budding grapes, then it's you already evaluated as if it's ripe grapes. So he's saying the same thing now. Answers the Gemara, Ike beinayu, the difference between them would be kachash gufna, whether you deduct a certain amount of the payment. What should you deduct over here? Kachash gufna means that the mazik says to the nizik, true, I have to pay you for the damage, even though it was just budding grapes, but I have to pay you for the full grapes as if it was already ripe. But the thing is though, there's a certain savings that I also caused you. What is that? If these grapes would have been left on the tree, it would have drawn out energy and nutrients from the vine itself. Now that my animal ate up your grapes, so now they didn't take out that energy from the vine. It didn't weaken your vine. So that amount of the difference that it didn't weaken your vine, you should deduct that from the payment that I'm paying you. So that's over here the machlok is, do you make this deduction in the payment or not? Now the Gemara says, V'loi Mesaimi. That is the difference between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, but it's not clear who holds what. Who holds that you do deduct this, and who holds that you don't. But Abaye says, Mesaimi u'Mesaimi. It is very clear who's the one that you make this deduction. Because Mantana Dachayesh L'Kachash Gufne, who's the one that does pay attention here to this deduction of the fact that now I saved you this weakness of your vine. Shimon ben Yehudi, we see that Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda said this concept in a different case. The Tanya, as we learned in Abraisa, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe, and the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe. Einus, a person that's forcing a girl in a relation. So he says, Eina Mishalem es hatzar. He doesn't have to pay for the pain that he causes her. And we're talking even about a basula, where there's pain. And so he doesn't pay for that pain. Why not? Because in the end, with her husband, she would have the same pain anyways. So he caused it to her now, and he saved her that pain later. So what do you see over here? Rab Shimon ben Yehuda holds this concept that even though, of course, what he did here is terrible, and he violated her, and he has to pay her for other things, but this that he ends up saving her, though, this tsar from later, that you deduct, that he doesn't have to pay. But Amrullah, the Chachamim disagree, and they told him, you can't say that, he saved it from that tsar later. Because you can't compare when she's with her husband, and it's willingly, and it's with this person, and it's by force, so he will have to pay for the tsar. So we see clearly that Shimon ben Yehuda was the one that held this concept in a case of a damage, or in this case, a tsar or injury, that you deduct this, that I prevented you, that you shouldn't have to go through later. So the Gemara here brings other Tanoim that said a similar thing. Oma Abaye. Hani Tanoi, v'Rab Shimon ben Yehuda Amru Davar Echad. There are these Tanoim and Rab Shimon ben Yehuda that we just quoted before. They said this very point that we spoke about. They said the same point. Rab Shimon ben Yehuda Hadamaran. Rab Shimon ben Yehuda, this point that we said, both regarding the vine and regarding the case of Eines, that you deduct the savings that comes out through this damage here. Hani Tanoi Mahi. Where are there other Tanoim that said the same point? The Tanya, we learned in the Braisa, and this Braisa talks about we learned about this earlier in the Masechta, a person that ended up, he had a fight, Kinotzu Anoshim, and then he ended up causing a woman to miscarry. So what happens? The payment for the miscarriage goes to the husband. But here there's a certain deduction. Rabbi Yosi says, Naki Chaya. But now, for the payment, the Mazik says, let's deduct from my payment the savings that I saved you, that you don't have to hire a midwife to help with the birth. So that you have to deduct from the payment of the loss of the fetus. Banazi says there's another deduction. Nakim Zainis. You have to deduct the payment of extra food that you have to buy his wife when she's pregnant, and he has to feed her extra. So you deduct that as well. So here we see another two Tanaim that say the same concept. But now the Gemara says, the one that says that you deduct the payment you would have to pay for a midwife, he would definitely also agree that there's the deduction of the food that you would have to feed her, to pay for her. On the other hand, though, is the one that says that there's the deduction because of the food that you don't have to give her, but the deduction of a midwife that you would have to hire, like that, there's no deduction for. Why? Because the husband could say to the mazik, it's a didi pekichi, my wife is very able, she doesn't need a midwife to help her, she doesn't need a midwife, so therefore there's no deduction for the fact that I saved money on a midwife. Talk to Gemara now. This is going back actually to the beginning of this whole sugya, where again the story and the discussion was whether this whole halacha, when you evaluate damage in a property, do you evaluate this area alone, or do you evaluate it in relation to a bigger area, shishim, in the property? So the Gemara Shaila was, do you say that applies only by a behemoth that damage, or does it also apply when a gufay, when the person himself damages? So that was the machlokes before Rav Nachman, Rava, the Reish Kalusa. So the Gemara says, Rav Papa, Rav Bereder, Rav Yeshua, Avud of the Kvasei Rav Nachman. They pasked like Rav Nachman, that said that you don't evaluate it. Rav Nachman was actually the one that says that even when the person himself damages, you do evaluate it in relation to a larger size of 60 saw. There's another version of how this went down. Rav Papa, that is, Rav Huna Bereder Rav Yeshua, Shomu Dikle Agav Ketinedara. They evaluated when there was one palm tree that was eaten, they didn't make the person pay just the value of this one palm tree itself, but they evaluated this palm tree in relation to a smaller property that was part of. And that the Mefarshim say that it's really the same idea, and that property was also 60 times of what this palm tree was. So now the Gemara says, yeah, we paskin Rav Papa and Rav Huna Bereder Rav Yeshua, which followed Rav Nachman, that you do not just evaluate this palm tree itself, but you evaluate it in relation to an area that's 60 times what it is. But when is that? B'dikla da'armo, by a palm tree, the Armenian palm trees, which I guess is more of a regular palm tree. So you don't want him to pay a high price for it. You should pay a more balanced price, which is based on its value within another 60 palm trees, another big area in a field. But on the other hand, though, v'hilchase, kavasei the Reish Galusa, but we do paskin like the Reish Galusa paskin, and they actually paskin pay the full value of this palm tree itself. When is that? B'dikle parsa, if it's a Persian palm tree. What's the unique about a Persian palm tree? This Persian palm tree is very choshev, and it's a very expensive palm tree. So therefore here, you do pay, Rashi says, choshev ma'oid, Rashi says, so therefore you do evaluate it separately and pay for that damage. So Dr. Gemara Eliezer Zeira, there was an individual by the name of Eliezer Zeira. So here the Gemara is going to bring a story about him where he brought up the same discussion that we talked about till now. But what happened was, Avasayim Misani Uchmi. He was wearing black shoes. Rashi says to wear black shoes in those times wasn't the normal thing. It was the minig of Avelim. Taisus here has a whole discussion about this, and Taisus wonders, was it actually not the minig to wear black shoes in those times? Taisus says they did wear black shoes, but they wore it with white laces. And he was wearing black shoes with black laces. So there, V'kai b'shukid the Nerdah, and he was in the marketplace of Nerdah. Ashkechei the Reish Galusa. So those people at the Reish Galusa encountered him, and they saw him wearing these black shoes, which was different than everyone. And they said to him, what happened over here that you're wearing these black shoes? So he answered them, because I'm mourning on the destruction of Yerushalayim. They said to him, you're such a prominent person that you publicly can go and act this way, that show this Avelis in Yerushalayim to wear in a regular day black shoes. Savor, they thought, Yurahava, this is a haughty behavior. It's not appropriate to have this kind of a haughty behavior. And they were so upset about this to the point that Asyu v'chavshua, they took him and they imprisoned him. So he saw that that he went and imprisoned him, and he wanted to get himself out, so he had to identify himself who he is and show his greatness. So he told them, Gavre Rabbana, I'm a great person, yeah, I am a prominent person, and therefore it is befitting for me on a regular day to wear these shoes and to mourn the destruction of Yerushalayim. Amrulei, so the people by Reish Galusa said to him, how do we know you're a great person? Amalahu, so Eliezer said to them, or you ask me a question and I'll answer. Or I'll ask you a question and let's see if you can answer. So they said to him, Boyat, you ask us a question. So Amalu, he says to them, and here's what we discussed in our sugya. Hi man, the kots kufre. A person that caught kufre. What's kufre? These are dates that are half ripe. Or Rashi says it's like the boiser by grapes. It's not fully ripe kufre. Dates, that is. So my mishalim, what do you pay for cutting these kufres? So they answered him, mishalim to make kufre. You pay the value of what half ripe dates are. So, which is really nothing. I mean, because kufre in itself, you can't sell it. If you cut it at that point, it doesn't get ripe, and it's really not worth anything. So basically, you don't pay anything. But Eliezer asked them, how could you say this? He caused this person the damage of, if you would have left it on the tree, it would have turned into good dates. So they should pay for full dates. So, okay, they heard the swari he said. So Amrulay, they said to him, you're right, so you have to pay the value of full dates. But Amalahu, so he asked them back, but how could you make him pay for actual full ripe grapes if this person did not cut and take full ripe grapes? So either way, they paskin, they saw that he proved to them that they don't know what they're talking about. Amrulei. Oh, so now they saw that they're dealing taka with a great person, so they said to him, to Eliezer Zira, so no, tell us, what's the pshat? How much do you pay over here? Amrulei, so they said to him, Eimelanat, so tell us how much you pay. Amalahu, so he answered them, Bishishim, that you evaluate it in relation to the fee, into the karka that it is, like we find by the properties when you damage one area. So you have to evaluate how much is the value of this property to be sold. You're looking at 60 times the size of what was eaten there. How much is the whole place going to be sold when it's missing this area, and how much would it be sold if it wasn't missing this area? That's the value that you pay. Amrulei, okay, they heard his psakdin, but they said to him, Manam kvasech, who says like you're psakdin? Amalahu, so Eliezer Zira tells them, Hashmul Chai, Shmuel is alive, Ubezdina Kayim, and his Bezdin is still here. So let's go ask Shmuel. Shadr Kamei the Shmuel, they sent to Shmuel to ask him the Shaila. Amalahu, Shmuel said, Shaper Ka'amalahu B'shishim. He's right, that's the psakdin. You evaluate it in relation to area that's 60 times the size, what it could be sold for now. V'shavku, after this, they let him go. Okay.
They didn't know who he was.
They saw that he's a Gavra Rabbe. That he, yeah.
No, not a question.
Okay. Zok the Gemara Rab Shimon Ama Aimer. Going back to what it said in the Mishnah, Rab Shimon says this whole halacha that we're talking about over here, and we already saw a little bit about this before here. The whole halacha that we said that you evaluate what's the produce of a field that was eaten in relation to a larger size in the field, 60 times the size. Rab Shimon in the Mishnah in the beginning of the Perek here said, when is that? Ochla Peiris gemurim, if you ate ripe peiris in the field, so then Rab Shimon says you actually pay the value of those ripe peiris for itself, whatever it is, not in relation to anything else. Only if the animal ate from peiris from the field when it's not ripe yet, then you are going to evaluate it together with a larger part in the field. That's Rab Shimon's distinction. So the Gemara says, what's the source? My time. What's the source for this? Because now, what was the whole source of this concept that you pay only in relation to a larger part in the field? The lashon of the pasuk, bir bizdei acher, in the whole field. That you don't evaluate just this part itself, you evaluate it within the field. So now he explains, look into that pasuk. So when the pasuk there says bir bizdei acher, which melamed, from there we learn out sheshomen al gava sadeh, that you don't evaluate just this produce itself that it ate, but you evaluate this produce in relation to the whole field here. Hanemili midi ditzarach lisada. Bizdeyacha means when it's still something that's growing and it's not ripe yet, and therefore it's attached and it still needs the growth of the field. That's when it's part of the field and you evaluate it in relation to the whole field. But hani, once it's already ripe, kivin the leit tzricha lisada beinayu boyishlomi. It doesn't need the field anymore. You can cut it, so it's if it's already cut and it's separate, and you pay for the produce itself that you ate, and you evaluate it separately. Amar Avuna bar Chia, Amar Rab Yirmiyah bar Abba. Don Rav Rav Meir. We find that Rav did a ma'aseh, he paskened like Rav Meir, and the Gemara is soon going to bring what halacha of Rav Meir. Upasak hilchas Rav Shimon. And when he taught his Talmidim, he taught them the halacha is like Rav Shimon. They should know for all future generations, halacha is like Rav Shimon. Now, what Rav Meir, what halacha of Rav Meir are we talking about? It says the Gemara Don Rav Rav Meir. This is the halacha of the Tanya we learned in the Braisa. As follows: Kosav l'rishain. A person that writes a document that he's selling a property of his to somebody. Now this is a property that he owns and he's married, and this property is also meshubed to the ksubah of his wife. And now she, in order for the sale to be free and clear, that she shouldn't be able to come and say that I have a shibud on my ksubah for this first. Now, so they bring this document to the wife that she should also sign off on this. The first person that this husband sold the property to should refuse to sign this off, to sign off on this, that is. And the sheni though, then later on the husband wanted to sell this property to a second person, and the wife signed off on it. So the Gemara says, Avda ksubasa. So she signed off on it, so she loses her ksubah, she loses the right to collect the ksubah from there. That's Rab Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, even if she signed off on it, she can still say, I wasn't serious, I was just doing it. I saw my husband wants to sell it, I didn't want to get into a fight with him, so I signed off on it. But really, I didn't give up my right to collect my ksubah from it. Atem malachem alai. So what do you have of me when I signed off on this? It's not for real. Okay, so now Rab Meir though held that you don't say that in such a case, because you see that the first person that came to her, she did not sign. The second person did sign. So we see that this was more intentional If she would have just wanted to make a nachas ruach for her husband, she would have already done that the first time around. Okay, but over here in this case is when Rav paskened like Rab Meir. Now, Pasuk Hilchasik Rab Shimon, that's Kihadet Nan, our Mishnah over here that we just had from Rab Shimon. That Rab Shimon, if the animal ate from the property and it's ripe fruits, B'Shalem is paid as Gemurin. So you pay the full ripe fruits for itself. Imsa, whatever the amount is, if it's a saw of fruits, Imsasayim, you don't pay it in relation to a larger size in the field. Only if it's not ripe and it still needs to be attached to the ground, then you pay in relation to a larger, in the 60 in the field, as we learned before. Okay, let's learn one more Mishnah here. Sagt der Heilige Mishnah, Hamagidish b'toich stei chaverei. Shaloi b'rishus, a person that goes and places a pile of his grain in someone's property without his permission. V'chlasam be'emte shabal asada. And the owner of this field has his animals, and he came and ate up from this person's pile of grain. Pater. So the Baal Asada is Pater, who gave you permission to bring your pile of grain into my property. Vim huzka behen. If the animal of the owner of this field got damaged by this grain here in the field, then balagolish chayiv, the one that brought in this pile here, is going to be chayiv to pay for the damage. V'im higdish b'rishos. However, if he made a pile there of grain in this person's property with permission, then balasada chayiv. Then the balasada will be chayiv for any damage that his animal causes. He gave rishos, so he has to guard his animal, not to damage this person's gadish that he made in this field. We had actually the same kind of Mishnah before in the Masechta, and Taisus over here asks why is it repeating the exact same din? So okay, based on the Gemara over here, we'll see that there is a certain chiddush over here in this Mishnah. Says the Gemara.
It's his son.
Again.
It's his animal. What does it mean chayev?
Balasada chayev means that the balasada will be chayev if he ate up from this person's grain that he made a pile in the field, because he took responsibility for this. Says the Gemara, Leimet Nan, the Loike Rebbe. Shall we say that over here in this Mishnah, there's a Stam Mishnah that disagrees with what Rebbe said. Why? Because we had the same exact inyan before in the Masechta. There it spoke about a person that brought fruits into someone's property or brought his animals into someone's property without permission. And there it brought that Rebbe argues. And what does Rebbe say? The Ike Rebbe says, Omar, Achi Yikabel olav balabayis lishmar. Even when a person gives you permission to bring your stuff into his property, it doesn't automatically mean that he's taking the responsibility to guard. He's just giving you permission to come in, but still you have to take care of your stuff yourself. Only if he befedish verbally says, I take responsibility, then he's going to have to pay. So here in our Mishnah doesn't say that. Here our Mishnah says he gave you the shus, and it's going to be his responsibility if his animal damages your stuff. So it's a Stam Mishnah, not like Rebbe. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Papa, Hocha over here, our Mishnah is another case, and this is the Chiddush of our Mishnah, Benatar Beidari Askinon. Over here it's talking about an area, let's say in a big valley where there's a lot of different fields and the people have a lot of grain, and there's one person that's the guard, that he guards all these grains over here in this area. So the Kivin Damale Ayal Gedoish, so if it's this guard that he's the one that he's hired in this area to do this job, for people to make piles of grain, and he's the one that guards them. So if he tells you, bring the stuff into my property, that permission itself means that he's going to guard it, because that's his job. He doesn't have to tell it to you clearly. Rebbe only argued in a case where you're bringing something into someone's property and he gives you permission. So there, the permission doesn't necessarily mean that he means to guard it. But here this Mishnah is talking about a case where this is the job of this person.